Serious questions over the way it operates after a review said that Britain's largest force needs a complete overhaul. And tonight, Sky News has found evidence of bad attitudes being applied to investigations of sexual assaults by officers in another constabulary. In a special report, one serving member of the Humberside Police says that she was left traumatised by abuse from a fellow officer. Well, we'll bring you that report in a moment, but first let's take a look at what the review by Baroness Casey found today. It said that the Met is institutionally racist, misogynist and homophobic. It says a lack of vigilance towards officers abusing their positions has allowed predatory behaviour to flourish. Rape cases were dropped after fridges broke and destroyed key evidence. And 12% of women in the Met said they had experienced sexual harassment or assault. Our home editor, Jason Farrell, has been speaking to two women tonight who reveal problems with misogyny within the Humberside police force.
For a while, seeing a police officer in uniform, I'd have flashbacks. If something happened to me again, I don't think I'd ever report it.
This is a serving police officer, so traumatised by abuse from a fellow officer that she's questioning her own force of Humberside. And her testimony suggests there might be the need for a Louise Casey-style review into sexism and other failings in every police force, not just London's. Sally says the sexism starts the moment you arrive.
The conversations quickly turned sexual.
Right.
I was sort of propositioned. You feel like you're fresh meat, that's the attitude. You feel like fresh meat coming in. And when I started to speak out about it and started telling people, everyone was like, oh yeah, he's done it to me. Oh yeah, he's done it to me. And it's always the same officers.
Humberside Constabulary was rated outstanding by the police inspectorate. But Sally says when it became known she'd reported a fellow officer for sexual violence, her colleagues rallied around him.
I was ostracised, given the cold shoulder. So I'd be stared at or given dirty looks. They were like schoolyard bullies. After the misconduct hearing, so after he lost his job, I lost count of the amount of officers that came up to me and said, I was always being like that.
Really?
Yeah. And he'd been in the job a really long time. And I thought, well, why have they not said anything then?
Yeah.
He basically had the same nicknames as those monsters in the Met.
Wayne Couzens was nicknamed the rapist by fellow officers before he murdered Sarah Everard. David Carrick, a serial rapist, was in the same unit. Now the Casey review has found the Met Police is institutionally sexist. But does it go wider? Sally says in Humberside, for example, colleagues knew that one predatory officer would get vulnerable victims' details from statements to ask them on dates.
And you think he was known for this?
His full shift would have known what he was like.
What's a full shift?
Oh, I reckon on each team, 20 police officers.
And Sky News has evidence of bad attitudes potentially impacting investigations. Anna alleged as a teenager she was being raped by a gang of men who intimidated her into going back to them. She used what's called a subject access request to get Humberside police records on herself. She found these types of comments made by officers. If the reports are genuine, we have a very vulnerable victim who keeps putting herself in danger. This is a very regular occurrence. The female herself is making lifestyle choices of her own. This victim doesn't come across as the best type of witness victim that I've seen.
That whole time I was still under social services. I was really vulnerable. I was on a protection plan. It said how I was getting strangled, I was being sexually assaulted, I was high risk, but they never did anything to stop that.
It's very much attention seeker, lifestyle choices, maybe putting herself at risk is another thing that comes up. So they're kind of blaming you.
There's no wonder the case was never brought to court because before it's even got there, they've completely undermined it. I think they basically set that case up to fail.
In one extract, they seem to accept the alleged attacker's story, saying the victim states that she's received injuries and these have been seen by police officers. The issue that we have is that the suspect admits to causing these injuries to the victim, but states that these were with consent, as the victim says she liked it. It is difficult for us to disprove this, and I would suggest the victim is too undermined in this investigation to take her word above that of the suspect.
I think it's quite disgusting. Like, how they can say that someone would enjoy being injured, it makes me really angry.
Louise Casey's findings have rocked London's police force, but she told Sky News the problems are likely to be national. Should there be a Louise Casey type review into every other police force?
I actually think the answer to that is yes, because I think that what we have found, there are some things there like vetting, like sort of the cultural issues, particularly around race and around women. I think that they are national issues. And I do think we need a wholesale change of public protection, particularly for women.
So we need this across the country, a proper delve into what's going on within police forces.
I think that we need a root and branch review of policing.
After a review, Anna's investigation was reopened, and for that reason, Humberside Police say they can't comment further. But Deputy Chief Constable Paul Anderson said child sexual abuse and exploitation is a deplorable and condemnable crime, and we're determined to bring offenders to justice and hold them accountable for their actions. With regard to Sally, the force says misogynistic behaviour will not be tolerated, adding there is an existing robust process in place. Anyone who exhibits any form of misogynistic or discriminatory behaviour will be held accountable for their actions. We are internally communicating with all officers and staff in regards to sexual harassment and have launched our Knowing the Line campaign to raise awareness and to fully encourage reports, whether personal or witnessed, to be made to our Professional Standards Department. Sally says she's still proud to be a police officer, but she's speaking out because she wants her colleagues to make the changes from within.
It's now snowballed into a massive thing because it's been hidden for so long and brushed under the carpet that it's now a monster.
The Casey review suggests that monster needs to be exposed and acknowledged before it can be properly tackled. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, Jason is with me in the studio. And Jason, allegations then about another force tonight. And the public's going to be really concerned about this in London and elsewhere in the country. Where does it all go next?
Well, first of all, this has been a day of reckoning for the Metropolitan Police Force. They've been accused of institutional misogyny, racism and homophobia. And whilst the Met Commissioner doesn't want to necessarily attach the word institutional to those failings, he does accept the diagnosis and he does seem to accept most of the cure that Louise Casey is offering. But he says it's going to take time. And that's what the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has also said. This is going to be a long road to recovery. But what Louise Casey is saying in this report that you've just heard is that actually we need to broaden this out. We need to probe into other police forces as well. And if you read the Casey review and you look at the examples in there, they are strikingly similar to what we've heard from those two women in Hull. There are real parallels there. And what that would suggest is that this problem, this failing, is far from contained to one police force.
Yeah, we've certainly not heard the end of it tonight, have we? Jason, thank you very much. Now, Russia's President Vladimir Putin has said it's the West that is continuing the war in Ukraine. During a summit with his Chinese counterpart, Putin said Moscow will react if the UK sends depleted uranium ammunition to Volodymyr Zelensky's troops. Well, the UK government said it would be providing armour-piercing rounds for Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. Sky's Moscow correspondent Dana Magnay reports.
This had all the pomp and circumstance of a presidential inauguration. The big red carpet walk up, their aides lined up on either side. Two men bent on restructuring the world order and strengthening their ties.
在双方共同努力下，中俄关系始终保持蓬勃、健康、稳定的发展势头。两国政治互信，利益交融，民心相通。 不断深化。
For Vladimir Putin especially, this visit matters. He wants to project an image of grandeur, of one great power with another, never mind sanctions or war crimes indictments. And he needs China's support, politically and crucially economically. As for Ukraine, he suggested it was the West stymieing prospects for peace, with a special mention for plans outlined this week by the UK to supply Kyiv with shells containing depleted uranium.
Похоже, что Запад действительно решил воевать с Россией до последнего украинца уже не на словах, а на деле. Но хотел бы в этой связи отметить, что если все это будет происходить, то соответствующим образом Россия вынуждена будет реагировать, имея в виду, что коллективный Запад начинает применять уже оружие с ядерным компонентом.
Present at today's meetings, Russia's key man on military technical cooperation and the defence minister, but nothing concrete on NATO concerns that China might lend military support to.
We haven't seen any proof that China is delivering lethal weapons to Russia. But we have seen some signs that this has been a request from Russia, and that this is an issue that is considered in Beijing or by the Chinese authorities.
If President Xi was considering it, he certainly wasn't telling.
China already provides Russia with an economic lifeline. Adding military aid to the mix would hardly fit with President Xi's peacemaking credentials, or with the narrative that he shares with Russia that it is the flow of Western weapons that are fueling this conflict.
Sanctions have made Russia heavily dependent on China. Energy flows are going east at discounted prices, and the deal signed today suggests a lot of other things will be too. President Xi has little to lose and much to gain by sticking with the status quo. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Moscow.
Back here, and Boris Johnson will be facing MPs on the Privileges Committee tomorrow over Downing Street parties during COVID restrictions. The former Prime Minister published his defence today, saying that he did not intentionally mislead Parliament, and criticised the highly partisan tone and content in the committee's damning interim report. Our political correspondent, Ali Fortescue, has been looking at what he said.
It was a scandal that helped bring down a Prime Minister with an 80-seat majority. The birthday cake. The suitcase of booze,
Is this recorded?
the cheese and wine.
This fictional party was a business meeting.
Did Boris Johnson recklessly mislead Parliament when he said this?
All guidance was followed completely during number 10. I repeat what I have said to him, that I have been repeatedly assured that the rules were not broken.
After a long wait, now we have this, Boris Johnson's defence, a 50-page dossier. In it, he effectively says he wasn't warned at the time. Look at this. I relied on assurances I'd received from my advisers, and it's clear now those assurances were wrong. As Prime Minister, I am reliant on advice from officials. His allies have certainly rallied.
People do mislead the House by accident. You know, you misspeak. If you say you have to understand every single nuance, and you're going to be held to account based on new facts received and punished on that basis, ministers will simply come to the dispatch box and say, I can't possibly comment, we're going to have an inquiry.
The former Prime Minister also effectively blames a number of officials. Look at this. He talks about a conversation he had with Jack Doyle, the then Director of Communications. He says Jack Doyle, explained to me that the media team held a regular Friday evening team meeting where they'd discuss what had occurred during the week and have a drink. As this was the last Friday of the year, there was also cheese and a secret Santa. I asked him, was it within the rules? He told me it was within the rules. But the committee investigating Boris Johnson say none of this evidence is new. Their initial report found that COVID rule breaches must have been obvious to the Prime Minister at the time.
He was the Prime Minister, he was responsible, he wrote the rules, and then he didn't abide by them. There's nobody to blame but him.
Boris Johnson says he wouldn't have immortalised events with official photos had he known that rules were being broken.
Are you confident your evidence will clear you, Mr Johnson?
Tomorrow, he faces 4 hours of questions in front of the committee. Their verdict could see him suspended or even losing his seat. Ali Fortescue, Sky News, Westminster.
And the former Prime Minister's evidence will be put to the test tomorrow at 2 p.m. You can watch that session of the Privileges Committee as Boris Johnson faces MPs' questions over whether or not he misled Parliament. You can catch that at 2 o'clock tomorrow, live here on Sky News. A man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after another man was set on fire while walking home from a mosque in Birmingham last night. Counter-terrorism police are now investigating the incident along with West Midlands Police. A warning that this report by Becky Johnson shows the moment the man was set on fire.
On the bottom right of your screen, you can see an elderly man wearing black and white has been stopped by the man who'll go on to attack him. He's trying to continue on his way, but the man pushes him. Now look to the left of your screen. As further down the street, the elderly man is set on fire.
I saw when all the fire went down.
It all happened outside Mansour Alam's house.
Before that, my wife came and she get the water, bucket of water.
She brought some water out.
Yeah.
So did you help put the fire out?
Yeah. She didn't do it. Somebody else. Another person helped him out, take his jacket out, because the person went crazy, take his jacket, he couldn't do, we don't know what to do, he's running everywhere.
It must have been terrifying.
Yes.
The victim had been walking home from this mosque in Birmingham. A man has since been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. Counter-terror police are helping with the investigation, but officers stress they're keeping an open mind about the motive for the attack. They are, however, looking at a similar case where an elderly man was set on fire outside a mosque in London last month.
Very quickly, we established there was a similar attack with a similar modus operandi in London. We've connected those two cases and we're working closely with the Metropolitan Police to see if those incidents are linked.
Councillor Sharon Thompson knows the victim in Birmingham and has been talking to his family.
He was just walking home from the mosque, finishing his prayers. So the whole family is absolutely devastated and traumatised, and they're staying by their dad's side, which is understandable.
His injuries aren't life-threatening, but they are serious. This attack has left people here asking why he was targeted and if they're safe in their community. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Birmingham.
Thomas Cashman, the man accused of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, has given evidence in his own trial. This afternoon, he told a court he had never, ever encountered problems with the alleged intended victim, Joseph Nee. Olivia was shot dead when a gunman burst into her home in Liverpool in August last year. Our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt, reports.
Thomas Cashman was brought to court to begin his defence of the murder charge he denies. In the witness box, Cashman said he was a high-level cannabis dealer in Liverpool, making up to £5,000 a week. That was before his arrest last year over the murder of a young schoolgirl in her family's home. Olivia Pratt-Corbell was 9, shot dead when a gunman chased another man into the house and opened fire. The prosecution say Joseph Nee was the real target, a convicted drug dealer. He'd already been shot once before he fled into Olivia's home. But Cashman told jurors, Joseph Nee and his brothers were my friends for 10 years. I've never had any problem with Joseph or his family, never. They've always been my friends. Cashman said he'd been with Joseph Nee at his mother's house the day before and denied scoping him out ahead of the shooting. Cashman was also asked about a prosecution witness, a woman he'd had an affair with. She claimed he'd turned up at her home after the shooting and said, "I've done Joey." Cashman told the jury he didn't go to her house and he hadn't confessed anything. The defence case continues in the morning. More evidence from Cashman, then he'll face questions from the prosecutor. Martin Brunt, Sky News, Manchester.
Staff at a school which planned to refuse entry to Ofsted following the death of their head teacher staged a silent walkout today. Ruth Perry, who took her own life in January, was head teacher at Caversham Primary School in Reading, which was rated outstanding but downgraded to inadequate following an inspection in November. Sky's Matthew Thompson has the story.
Her tragedy has sparked a teacher's revolt. Here at this school in Newbury, just a few miles from where Ruth Perry took her life, staff filed out in silent solidarity. Ruth's family say she killed herself as a direct result of a critical inspection by Ofsted, the school's regulator. Liz, a former teacher at Ruth's school, told us the inspection didn't reflect reality.
Teachers were not leaving Caversham Primary. Teachers were there for years and years and years under Ruth's headship, and they were happy there. And they had a dedicated and caring and expert head teacher. And this is just devastating, and this is why we're here for Ruth today.
And another community was left devastated in 2015 when Carol Woodward killed herself after Ofsted downgraded her school. Police told her inquest the inspection was fair, but its timing during exams had contributed to immense pressure on her. Over the phone, Carol's husband Roger told me about the impact it had.
Even though it was sort of 6 to 7 years ago, it's almost as though it was yesterday. Ofsted just put schools under a tremendous amount of pressure, and the head teacher obviously bears the brunt of it. And in this sort of latest scenario where she's being criticised, and like Carol said, she sort of felt as though the whole school had been let down.
One concern in schools is the grading system used by Ofsted, something that was scrapped in Wales last year after a review.
Schools are very, very complex organisations, so a grade is attempting to give a kind of one-word judgment about a very complex organisation.
The government said that inspections are important for holding schools to account. The question is, at what cost to teachers? Matthew Thompson, Sky News, Newbury.
Gwyneth Paltrow has appeared in court in the United States, accused of being involved in a hit-and-run ski crash in 2016. The actress's accuser claims he sustained a brain injury and broke 4 ribs in the collision, but Ms Paltrow says the man was to blame.
Plaintiff said, if these are my notes in his opening, she was dangerous and reckless. She's skiing with her 9-year-old son, who's a beginner. She is focused, she is not distracted. She got taken out from behind. I mean, that's what happened.
And beavers will be reintroduced to a wetland in West London in a bid to tackle climate change. Conservationists hope the planned wetland will promote biodiversity. In a similar project last year, 2 beavers called Justin and Sigourney Beaver were introduced to a farm in North London, but the male beaver died before they could breed. Now, the Prime Minister's Windsor framework is facing opposition ahead of MPs voting in Parliament tomorrow. The European Research Group of Eurosceptic Conservative MPs described parts of the Brexit deal as practically useless. Yesterday, the Democratic Unionist Party said that they could not support the proposals. Sky's political correspondent Joe Pike reports.
And there's a nice diagram on the back.
Almost 7 years after the UK voted to leave the EU, battles over Brexit are still not over.
I'm going to make a brief statement.
As today, the ERG group of Tory Eurosceptics rubbished Rishi Sunak's latest deal.
EU law will still be supreme in Northern Ireland. The Stormont break is practically useless, and the framework itself has no exit other than through a highly complex legal process.
Although they stopped short of saying they'd oppose it in Parliament.
Will you vote against it? Let's wait till we've got our meeting tomorrow.
Rishi Sunak's Windsor framework was intended to reduce checks on goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. At the heart of it, the Stormont break.
If the break is pulled, the UK government will have a veto.
A mechanism to give the Northern Ireland Assembly more of a say over how EU law applies in Northern Ireland. But it's not enough for the influential Democratic Unionist Party.
We're not in a position to endorse the Windsor framework.
Their continued opposition means Northern Ireland's Assembly hasn't sat for more than a year, even though most politicians at Stormont back the New Deal. And some experts were impressed by what the PM negotiated.
I was surprised at some of the things they have been able to secure. I do think it is a change from where we have been. It does address many of the concerns. And I think if you look at the response from businesses in Northern Ireland, generally they have welcomed and been optimistic about the benefits.
We'll have to wait until tomorrow afternoon to see the size of the rebellion here in Parliament, to see whether members of the ERG abstain or vote against the government, and indeed to see whether they move en bloc. But if there are a small number of rebels, let's say 10 to 20 MPs, that won't just be a relief for Rishi Sunak. It would also perhaps suggest the ERG are now
a bit of a spent force.
Labour support will guarantee a government win in the Commons. But at Stormont, power sharing still seems a long way away. Joe Pike, Sky News.